for us one motorcycle fatality of those 70 that crushes people's lives. If you could get one of those prevented, if you could get 6 kids who aren't gonna finish high school, finishing high school, wouldn't you? If Justin could get 3 fires prevented, or someone who works in advancing the environment could get 1 community drinking water supply cleaner, wouldn't you do that? This class is all about finding those units of meaning and performance that can deliver something that counts in the lives of the people. Because the difference between doing okay and very well in those lives and in the work you do in motorcycle fatality prevention and slipping the cuffs onto somebody who's done very bad, into capturing criminals, preventing fires, everything that you're working on. The difference between doing okay and very well is huge in the lives of the people. And we can't exempt you. We can't say, you know what, you don't have to think about that. You don't have to think that the next thing you do, how well you do, matters that much, because you do have to think about that. That's the joy, the beauty of the kind of nonprofit and public service that most of you are involved in. Rather than not thinking about it, let's embrace it, and let's use selection of policies as a way to get those extra gains that I just described. Let's do that. Let's see if we can't spend 3 days figuring out how you devise policy solutions that rocket through people's existence, that might take misery and create and take it off the table and put opportunity on the table. So let's see if there aren't some devices, some tools, some analytics that help us do that, and I think we'll be glad we did. You can think about something you did 10 months ago, and you say, God, I'm glad I did that. Years ago, I was involved in thinking about how to, back before there were all these kinds of things, I was thinking about how you connected homeless persons to information and services, might be health or housing. And we got into this scheme back when, this is when some of you were very young, where we thought, as much as people hate voicemail, wouldn't it be terrific if individual homeless and phoneless people had personalized voicemail accounts? And we thought, well, yeah, let's do that. And for a time, in 40 cities across America, 50,000 homeless people had that because people thought of something that was feasible, supportable, and valuable. So the next page of the Marika David initial explication is 2 out of 3 won't do. 1 out of 3 is awful. 0 out of 3, of course, you could find yourself advancing an unfeasible, unsupported, lousy idea. And of course, that's the day you need to go home from work early. But lots of times, and you've talked about it, and this is Unit 12, you've talked about it in other units, sometimes you do find yourself, for instance, developing a valuable idea, proving that it's feasible, and not getting support. So that's all about, Doble and understanding your authorizing environment in much more sophisticated ways than we used to. Not just making a list of who's for and who's against, but really understanding how you can work within that authorizing environment, and that's a good thing. A lot of the Carrie's magical 3-day courses are in some way or another about feasibility, how you as a manager can make things work, how you can develop your own skills, but also the mechanics of adaptation a la Steve Page, or other elements of how things change and what you're going to do about it. And you know already that you can adjust things and make them more feasible. So St. Paul's over at the YMCA, and maybe the YMCA's got a program to mentor really 16-year-old men who are kind of on the edge, young men, And so he works on a program that he can get his board to support, and he can figure out how to schedule it, how to staff it, and his valuable idea is mentoring in groups of 14 with a trained leader. And then he finds out that there's some evidence that Eureka shows him that there are no demonstrable results in what happens to a kid if the mentoring comes in a group of 14. So Paul's trafficking in an idea that is feasible, supportable, and not nearly as valuable as it could be. If he could figure out a way to get one-on-one mentoring at scale for a lot of 16-year-old young men who are floundering in Seattle, if he could figure out that way and still produce good mentors at student number 173, that would be a wonderful thing. This is about attending to all three parts of the triangle. And you see in the 3 days we start, Marika starts after I get done this morning, just cranking it with BARDAC. What does it tell you? What does it have to do with what you learned from Pam McCann about flu vaccine many, many months ago? What does it tell you about how does it connect to what Ann Bostrom was saying to you about personal choice? What can you say? What can you do? What analytics can you develop so that you're attending to the valuable side of that triangle? Because if you don't, you are leaving misery on the table when you can take it off. There's a fatality, there's an apprehension, there's a fire, there's a person served that isn't going to be served because we didn't crank out every unit of valuable that we could. So in the first day, that's what we're about, just the underlying analytics. In the second day, as you know, with your...
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, what is it, Dylan?
Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall.
Oh, tell me more.
And then Humpty Dumpty had a great fall.
Oh, no.
And then all the king's horses and all the king's men, they couldn't put him back together again.
Oh, no. Well, lucky I have a distinguished class of policy analysts here with me to help sort out this problem. Because here in Pleasantville, this will not stand. Not on my watch as mayor of Pleasantville. We will not have unreasonable levels of wall falling. We will attend to this problem, and you, as our new staff of Cracker Jack policy analysts, will help me figure out this problem. Luckily, just the other day, I had a briefing on the incidents of wall falling in Pleasantville. I'm very unhappy to hear about this new incident of Humpty falling off the wall. Eerily reminiscent of an American nursery rhyme. But as you know, I in the past have dealt with parent groups, education groups, I've dealt with apartment owners. We've been trying to decrease the incidence of wall falling in our community. It's not a minor thing. It's not something we as officials of the city of Pleasantville will take lightly. It's not something that where we will get distracted by the many other things that you will all work on as policy people in my staff. It's something that we will focus on and we will resolve and we will develop supportable, feasible, valuable interventions so that wall falling will decrease in our city. So please, in the next 15 minutes, start out by trying to analyze the situation here. What would you like to know that I might have gained in my briefing about wall falling in Seattle, in Pleasantville? I'm ready to answer your questions about this incident and other incidents like it in our fair community. Yes, sir.
What are some of the specific demographics of the people who hoard eggs that fall off?
We've looked at the incidence of wall falling in the last 3 or 4 years. It is certainly true that it trends lower income than the general population of the city, a little bit, but not overwhelmingly so. In the 18 incidents over the last 3 years. As you know, we have, Pleasantville has significant pockets of low-income populations, and 10 or 11 of those 18 cases were kids from low-income families. Keisha.
We're following up on that question, or with the walls mainly in certain areas of Pleasantville? Can you target which areas these walls are?
Excellent question. The distribution has been pretty broad around the city. There is some feeling that 5 of the 18 over the last 3 years have been in an area where the city needs to upgrade all sorts of facilities. So it's possible, the Public Works Director thinks even on city property in those areas, there's walls that are sitting up there at 8 feet or so that are attractive nuisances. So there might be, we need to do more work with geographic information, but we're not seeing any, the 18 incidents in the last 3 years are spread out across the city. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that over 50% of incidents occurred to low-income individuals.
That's
What
under
about-
200% of federal poverty level.
What about in reference to ethnic origin or age?
Well, the 6 or so of the 18 incidents were from the egg population. Of course, that's skewed a little bit by breakability. They're more likely, once they fall, to not be able to be put back together again. But we're not seeing any sharp correlations. Eggs are a little more likely to be permanently injured. Other ethnicities, we're not seeing any dramatic pattern. Certainly a little pattern, as I mentioned in the earlier question with regard to income. We're hypothesizing that has to do with what a kid does after school. He's more likely to sit on a wall or fall off of a wall. If he goes to the wall, which he's more likely to do if he doesn't have anything to do. That's our hypothesis.
Comparing to other cities, how is the rate of wall falling compare between Pleasantville and other cities?
We're having enormous data problems. For this reason, wall falling in the report of the various statistics, the police departments, and emergency rooms, and national injury and kinds of consumer statistics is not coded in any uniform way. There have been workshops at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities on these kind of problems. I have to say that there are some communities our size that do not have this problem at all. But we could stand to look more at the data about whether there are some that have more than us fall.
So what is the cost of wall falling to the city and to the taxpayers?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is in the cost of the response of the King's horses and King's men and women when they go to the site. So obviously, it's one of the things that our wonderful EMTs do. There's a cost to enforcement if you're worried about wall falling. There's a police cost, a policing cost. There's some costs related to keeping walls less hazardous, but the big cost to us, of course, is in the demise of our citizens. Obviously, we're a city that wants our citizens to be safe, to aspire to have dreams, and when you have this kind of unconscionable level of human and egg injury, then those dreams are not fulfilled. Dan?
What kinds of interventions have we taken to date?
We did have a nice meeting with PTAs that are unified across the city on childhood injury, and they put together a packet that was sent to teachers about describing to children all sorts of hazard, but they did add some very compelling wall falling material. The Daily Bugle, as you probably saw a couple months ago, did a really nice piece on wall hazard. We have had the Public Works Department work through the first maybe quarter of the walls we would like to have be a little less attractive of a nuisance. And in a few of those cases, we found some discretionary money and put some padding down at a wall that's 6 feet or so. If you have padding or even soft bark, you might be able to prevent serious injury. So we've done some of that, and the Public Works Director in the new budget has asked for some more of that money and said maybe in 8 years or so, he will be able to work through the backlog of those 6 foot or so walls that are on public property. Yes, and back.
So at this time, you want to focus on reducing injuries to these.
How can I not? I'm the mayor of our city.
Right, but what I'm
I
thinking.
know you feel the same way, but, I mean, it just breaks your heart.
Well, yeah, but beyond that. The injuries, by putting down some softer turfs or whatever. But what about the bigger problem? These kids, low income, not having activities after school. Is that something that's off the table for now?
Oh, no, you're my policy analyst. I want you to let it rock with regard to anything you think I do, as you should do. As you know, when you applied for the job, I'm a mayor that wants to get things done and wants to learn about what to do. So I'm here for you, whatever ideas you have, yes.
Do you have a comprehensive list of all the walls in the city and which ones are private and which ones are public?
The Public Works Department has done a comprehensive list of the walls that are on property managed by them, by the Parks Department, by the Fire and Rescue folks. We do not have a comprehensive list of the walls on private property.
Are they an issue? The ones on private
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Of the 18 incidents of the last 3 years, 13 of those 18 were on private property. Actually, that's a little bit of a fudge because in a couple more are on property managed by private interests in connection with the public. Yes, Tom?
What about safety and training to prevent this from happening? What kind of
Training
Like
of
for-
kids?
Yeah, safety program,
What-
awareness so that, help prevent them so they know what the risks are.
Well, there are 5th grade units in safety in all of our public elementary schools, but they've got a lot of safety issues. I can't say that uniformly wall falling is a topic. And remember, there are some social scientists or social psychologists that argue that in some classrooms, if you spend time talking to kids about not doing it, you might be increasing the incidence of them doing it because you said not to. So you should think about that, yes.
Did Humpty Dumpty take responsibility for his own death? Or did he blame everyone else?
Well, in the case, as you know, I'm the mayor in this case, and I have mixed feelings about that. Obviously, it's not me that climbed up that wall. I'm not Humpty's parents. I don't wanna say that the mayor or the mayor's staff can prevent every malady in our city. I don't want to say that. On the other hand, I want our city to create safe spaces. So to the extent that we do not tackle wall safety, and then I do believe I bear a share of the responsibility. That's in that.
So were there any other extenuating circumstances? So for example, were any of the eggs boiled or pickled when they were up on the?
In the 18 incidents, we've done some profiling, and their thinking is there is no evidence of impairment in any but a couple, 3 cases. So we're not thinking that's a big issue. Elena?
Have you considered engaging any of the citizens in identifying solutions that might help with this problem?
Well, certainly, at least as I mentioned on the education side, we've got some interest from the PTA in thinking about how to do this in the schools. On the kind of private property side, I did go and meet with the Council of Pleasantville Property Owners, and we did have a very fruitful discussion. Let it be said that they are much, much more interested in sending memos and voluntary measures with their apartment owners than they are with any city regulation of private walls beyond their load-bearing capacity. They are not interested in the city regulating non-load-bearing walls. They're just not. Scott?
Are there any other structures in the city that eggs climb on that would actually be of greater danger?
Remember, this isn't just eggs, this is our regular rank and file citizen, but certainly you could have an accessible roof. That hasn't that hasn't showed up in the data, kids and eggs falling off roofs. Jude?
Well, they're not interested in having additional regulation on walls on private property, but given that and the cost to the citizens, do we have anything on the books or any way of recouping costs from private owners that would incent them to?
No, there's all sorts of building code violations that can bring fines and help pay for the building code enforcement having to do with structures, as you know, but nothing having to do with, with a wall that somebody, and they would say, not without some justification, that it's not the wall. I mean, a lot of people sit on walls and don't fall off. Let me tell you the intendants, so I need you to keep pushing on what you need to know, because we have other matters for the staff meeting, and I'm gonna need some alternatives from you folks. Lori?
I have a few questions. First, how did this come to your attention? Like, who brought it to your attention?
Dylan just now, I did not.
Is Dylan part of the group? Did she?
Dylan's one of your staff members. She's had a communications for her.
And then in these
You'll
areas-
have lots of chance to work with her over the years.
In these areas, are there parks or recreational places where the eggs could maybe climb something?
We're pretty comfortable with Pleasantville parks. It's certain, as you know, we're developing a new vest pocket, kind of smaller park in the western side of the city that those citizens have felt a little underserved, but generally, our citizens are very, very proud of Pleasantville parks. Yes?
Is wall falling a problem throughout the state or just in Pleasantville?
Well, we're having a hard time with the numbers, as I noted, because it's not coded at all the same way by emergency rooms, but certainly when I've gone to our state's League of Cities meetings, there are other mayors who are scratching their heads over this one for sure. Karen?
Do we know if the padding and the wood chips are effective?
Yes, there's an article done by the School of Medicine that does underscore the efficacy of various treatments. As you would guess, the more sophisticated the treatment, the more it costs. You can't cover as many walls if you're doing rubberized material. So our Public Works Department raised with me the possibility of doing all the walls, but with wood chips, but the report from the university shows that that's something like 35% less effective. It's certainly better than nothing, but not as good as the rubberized surface. However, if we do the rubberized surface, it's certainly going to decrease the bike safety campaign, because we'd have to take that money in the present budget from the development of new bike lanes, which is a huge investment in bike safety. Dan?
How has this been portrayed in the media to date?
I think, well, just between us, I hope this won't go beyond here. I kind of feel that I can't be responsible for every injury in Pleasantville, but I think the media, I talked to the editor of the Bugle, I think he thinks we haven't been as nimble on this one. I wouldn't mind, just between you and me, showing a little nimbleness on this. I got home one night and my sweetie was reading the paper and she had a long look, and I didn't even want to ask her what she was reading about me. Lisa?
You mentioned private property owners, PTAs. Are there any other stakeholders that we need to be aware of?
Well, I'd like your help on that. What should I be thinking about? Certainly, the King's horses, not the horses themselves, but the men and the women that run the King's horses and King's men are stakeholders in that they would like better response time and response equipment. That educational community and the Citizens League, which pushes good government, is always interested basically in
There isn't
everything.
anyone else that has come forward that you're aware of that we wouldn't necessarily anticipate having an interest in?
Well, I think within a community, they're kind of thinking that they have a disproportionate impact, and we should be especially concerned about how they feel. David?
Is there an optimal wall height wherein the base or minimizes the hazard of it?
Yeah, the research from the engineering schools seems to indicate that you don't want any wall unless it is there for a structural purpose over 6 feet and ideally none over 4 feet.
So how high are these walls that people are falling off of?
Well, in the 16 incidents, they've gone from 4 feet to 10, and some of them, you know, over on Canterbury Acres in the east side, that big, there's some that are, they're just there for decorative purposes. In that case, they're trying to look like old Englanders.
These walls obviously serve some function and have some value to the property owners.
Oh, absolutely.
Is it possible to proceed with a wall reduction campaign, a wall height reduction campaign?
Well, we're gonna go to alternatives, so I'll come back to you. So, all I'm reporting to you so far on that is that the apartment owners are on red alert, not wanting me as mayor to propose to the council that there be any required retrofitting or even requirement, building code requirement in the future. They want, therefore, voluntary and educational efforts. Keisha?
What kind of historical data exists on the timeline of the design, construction of these walls? So the 18 walls over the past 3 years, when were they designed?
All over the place.
I mean, is there a time frame specifically that these walls, and is there, along with that, is there a particular contractor or someone who's done the majority of these walls?
No, it's spread by year of construction. The only thing I will say is there is a slight improvement in wall construction technology that makes the top a little bit less slippery. So if you got a new wall, you've got a little higher likelihood that the surface on top is grippable.
A new wall from like the last year, the last
10 or so years, but it's not significant. It pales in comparison to the surface down at the bottom. Remember, another factor is how you access the higher wall. So if it's an 8 feet wall and it's 8 feet behind and in front, it's hard to access for a kid. Some of these walls are 8 feet in front and 4 feet in back. Kid climbs up from the back, falls off the front. That's obviously what we don't want. Shanna?
Have any signs been posted on the walls?
In some of the public areas and a couple of the private property owners, please do not climb on the wall. Remember, same thing I said before, for a certain kind of kid, that's a big old climb this wall behest. Danielle?
To ask about the feasibility of spending all this money on preventing it versus fixing Humpty Dumpty. So has anybody ever looked at the cost of prevention versus the cost of putting Humpty Dumpty back together?
Sure. As you would know, there's some injuries with all the advanced equipment of the King's Horses and the King's Men isn't going to put Humpty back together again, but it has been argued by our EMTs that if they had more advanced equipment that maybe, well, there were only 4 egg instances where there was egg demise, and they think at least in 2 of those 4 cases, the advanced equipment of King's Horses and King's Men and Women would have done the trick and created a rehab situation rather than a demise. However, that's very expensive equipment. I have to look at back to the bicycle lanes. So when, after 2 or 3 more questions, I'm gonna ask for your policy alternatives. Yes, Megan?
Are there trends in the time of year where these walls happen?
A little bit more during the summer. It's colder in Hackett Pleasantville in the winter, so a little less of that. So not an incredible trend, but if you were to focus on seasons, you'd focus on spring and summer. Yes, Dan?
What traditionally has been our tolerance in Pleasantville for passing public safety levies, and are you aware of any federal funds available for public safety?
The federal funds increasingly are heading toward bikes. There's quite a significant, understandably, bike lobby. There's no dedicated federal fund to help retrofit walls. There is some interest on the state level. I'd say our chances of getting any support from the state or federal government in the short term for any strategy that you would devise would be very low. Yes, Rob?
Mr. Mayor, I'm new to Pleasantville, so this question may be very basic.
We did recruit nationwide, so welcome to our state.
How do the walls serve your constituency?
Our constituency loves that Pleasantville is an attractive town, so in many cases, a wall will be partially load-bearing, and it was built with another 20-foot section for decorative purposes. You think of the park over there on North Street, where the walls are really, they have some ivy on it, and they're really part of the ambiance of that wonderful park that people go to for picnics. So you would know as well, just like walls serve people anywhere that you've lived, it's not anything different in Pleasantville, except you'd have to say that, you know, the "Ain't God Good to Pleasantville" motto comes part out of our feel and look as a community. So I think we feel pretty proud. Todd?
Have you done any benchmarking with other communities that had similar challenges to see what they've done and see if there's any viable ideas or solutions? for
Well,
them?
the only thing I could say is, I went to a mayor's meeting a couple months ago, and I was very interested with what one mayor was doing with kind of a summer employment youth construction corps under the supervision of a construction manager, and they were doing on city property some modest retrofit. Obviously, there's union issues with that, and safety issues, and liability issues. I mean, the number of issues are many, but I found it intriguing. Final questions, yes, Tom, Elena, and Mike.
So, Mr. Mayor, I believe I heard you say a few minutes ago that it was going to take approximately 8 years to work through the backlog?
That was the backlog of cushioning that was being done by the Public Works Department.
So from your point of view, sir, is this a priority? Because if it's a priority, then.
I'm for all sorts of things that would serve our people.
But I think we need a better understanding of whether this, we can come up with a supportable and a valuable and a feasible solution. Where does this fall on your spectrum of priorities?
I would say that it's a serious matter that I'm hoping that you can be inventive in helping me to confront. I do not want you going around the community and saying, Mayor Harrison is significantly more interested in wall falling than he is bike paths. I just don't think any of us need that, but you can assure the citizens of this city that I care deeply about this matter, and I'm looking for efficacious ways to decrease the pain and suffering that has caused our citizens. I don't know if I can do better than that. I want you to avoid expensive solutions that do not produce results and take money away from other needs, for sure. So I don't have, as you know, it's a tight budget. Elena?
Well, Mr. Mayor, certainly all the King's horses and the King's men and women and the EMTs and the victims of themselves are aware of the problem, as are you. But what do you know about public attitudes and public awareness of the situation?
Well, other than the Bugle editorials, I don't know if there's anything that can be described as public. The Citizens League itself is kind of the highly informed public. I think if you went to the department store or the food store or the coffee shop, they'd say it's a damn shame what's happened in Pleasantville with regard to these child injuries. It's a damn shame. It's too bad that we let that go on. It's just too bad. It's what the public attitude is. Mike?
It sounds like it's isolated to children, but wondering do we have a sense
We have almost no adult wall falling. I mean, they do lots of awful things to themselves. They just don't.
Do we have a sense of what the motivations are for sending the walls in the first place?
Well,
is it a site issue?
You know, we've talked to the kids in Eggs where there wasn't a fatality. The number one response was, I don't know. So I don't know. Nothing much to do is another. Ted dared me to do it. That kind of stuff. Final questions. I'm going to take these 4 hands, and then we got to go to solutions. You 3 folks and Karen. Okay, Lisa.
You mentioned earlier around the low-income kids that maybe they didn't have anything better to do. Are you implying that in your last statement that these kids that are on the walls are all kids who don't have somewhere else to be?
No, I I said 11 of the 18 kids in the last 3 years are from low-income families, and that one of the hypotheses is that a kid whose family has less resources is less likely to be taking swimming lessons after school.
But you have no data around what these after-school activities are.
Of those 18, no, I don't. Absolutely not. Yes, Cynthia?
Mine was along the same strain of the lack of other things to do, and I was wondering if we could look into creating some activities, rec clubs, that type of thing for these low-income.
Well, I mean, the schools are the primary deliverer of after-school activities in our wonderful nonprofit community, but there has been a request to us over time to do a better job as the city in making sure those kinds of things happen, maybe better use of city's physical facilities, partnering not with nonprofits. Of course, that comes at a cost, so certainly we could play a role in a coalition that increased after-school activities.
So that rolls into what you said, that there's an elevation in these incidences occurring in the summer, i.e. when schools are closed?
Well, there's an elevation in spring and summer because it's uncomfortable in Pleasantville to sit on a wall in the late fall and the winter. So I think we're not discerning any different after-school problem in one month or another. And we're a little worried about what kind of results that would get us on the wall falling front. I'll tell you that from the bandstand. You didn't have a question? Okay, and then there's Karen.
Oh, I just want to know if any of the if multiple incidents have happened on individual walls, or whether it's been 18 different walls.
There's only 2 walls that have had 2 incidents, and everything else is, other 14 are all individual walls. Okay, so I'd like staff, I know you're early on in this job, but we're a results town, and I need some policy alternatives. I don't want to announce them to the press today, but I wouldn't mind hinting at what kinds of things that we're investigating. Danielle?
Could increase subsidies to schools to provide more opportunities for children of low income to have access to after-school and summer programs?
Okay, increase subsidies to schools serving low-income areas. I have to tell you, we don't have any,
Or actually just schools in general?
we don't have any direct city funding. Schools are, as you know, they have a separate tax base. So rather than increase subsidies, if you advance that alternative, they would be new subsidies from the city budget, because we don't send checks to the Pleasantville School District, which is a common situation because they have their tax base. I know in Seattle, Washington, there's a separate levy, but that's uncommon. Tim?
Modify the building code so all future walls and future remodels have to be built in a more safe manner.
So building code, no retrofit, just building code, basically prohibiting dangerous non-bearing wall construction, right? Do you want to say more about what the penalty would be, or I guess the penalty is it's got to be torn down. It's a building, it's a code, it's an absolute prohibition. We'd have to test what wall would how to decide whether it's load bearing or not, and all sorts of other things, but once it doesn't pass the test, it can't be built, won't be approved. Okay, Keisha?
What about applying those building codes, I mean retrofitting, assessing the safety of all existing public and private walls in public space?
How would that work?
I guess just figuring out the current safety standards for all walls and then going back and making sure that all the walls that are in public space now are within those safety codes, and if they're not, then.
My keen mayoral ears went from you saying public and private, and then when you went back the second time, you said public. Are you not going to?
No, and private.
Oh, and private.
Yes, and private, thank you
Okay.
for helping.
What is the consequences of the private, when the private apartment owner does not do the retrofitting? As you know, with the building code,
Right.
you're there with them when they're building it, you can prevent them.
Right.
All sorts of ways in the building code to keep them from not doing something.
Right.
How do you get them to retrofit if they don't want it?
Maybe a tax incentive over a few years?
Incentive.
Or break over a few years?
So you're not.
Help me out, friends.
Are you, anybody want to work on this idea? Yes, Cynthia.
I'm wondering.
It's
if we
touching to me as mayor to see our staff working together. Because in other staffs, sometimes it's just a backstabbing, dog-eat-dog environment. We don't have that in Pleasantville.
No. So what, if we're taking a look at setting some safety some safety codes for existing walls also, both existing walls and new walls, then, if the, private owners, you said a number of these incidents occurred on private land. So if they don't meet the safety standards, then the accountability for the incidences would be passed back to those private owners.
So, this is a related idea, and it has to do with insurance and liability. So you're working on something that motivates them to not have that wall because their failure to adhere to a public safety standard, which is not necessarily a requirement, it's a standard, but they make themselves vulnerable with regard to insurance and liability. If they improve the wall, their insurance rates might go down and they decrease their exposure. So this is a cousin of Keisha's idea. Let's put that out there and let's go back for a minute to Keisha's idea. If we're gonna have a proposal to retrofit, what does it include, Todd?
I think it would include going back, like you mentioned earlier, some of the benchmarking of the other communities that have had similar situations that was intriguing, and that, to see what they did, to see along the lines of.
That was all on public property, the core, the youth core.
Right.
So I wanna, and you can propose that, I wanna know whether anybody's proposing a regulation on retrofitting and what that includes. Shauna?
To feed off of Keisha's point, if the private property owners didn't want to retrofit their wall, then they could put the padding below, or there could be other alternatives, so they wouldn't have to demolish the wall.
So it's retrofitting or injury reducing behaviors, but I need to know the nature of the requirement, so that is definitely Justin.
Yeah, the nature of the requirement would be a local ordinance that would be adopted in the Pleasantville Municipal Code, and it would give them an option of doing either. There would not be an option to not do anything, because if it was.
And the consequences?
We would determine the consequences where, we would levy against the property, something along those lines.
Levy.
Levy fines.
So that goes along with what I was going with that.
Okay, so they get a series of options that are consistent with standards, that might decrease their insurance, that decreases their liability, and it's a series of options, and if they don't do it, they get fined. Okay, so that's that proposal. In a minute, I'm gonna ask you for proposals in other areas like after school or education. Ivy?
I guess I would recommend amending number 3 and have it be, have the ordinance be implemented, but to delay needing to do the retrofitting until sale, in order to make it a little bit more
Until what?
palatable. Until the sale of the property. In
Oh.
the case of private property, it's very common that, in terms of dealing with those kinds of problems, that in order to make it more palatable, you delay it until the property's.
So if you did a graph of that, you might have a 20-year cycle where you get everything, almost everything retrofitted, but you would have non-conforming property, as you know. In year 14, on the other hand, you're decreasing your opposition from your apartment owners too.
It seems to me that this is very similar to the situation we have with pools, and so I'm sure that that's something we've dealt with in the past before, about requirements about having gates and things around pools to prevent. So I would say that whatever we do as far as at least the safety issues or the liability insurance issues, that if we bring it in line with any ordinances around swimming pools, then we just sort of list high walls kind of as a nuisance, the same way the swimming pool is.
It makes sense to me. It sure doesn't to apartment owners because there's a lot fewer pools than there are walls. Somehow it just strikes them, and I have to tell you, even the slower retrofitting would have more support. There are some, I talked to Ted Johnson over at on Walker Street, and he, with his 20 apartments, he'd do that in a heartbeat. The retrofitting or injury reducing mandate with fine, apartment owners, I'm not saying I won't do it, I'm just saying you should know the apartment owners are gonna raise hell, so anything you got for me that will help me with that, I would deeply appreciate it.
Well,
Sandra,
instead of
yeah.
just injury reducing, you could say like access reducing, right, which might be slightly less costly than having to put in. all
Yeah, so you're saying maybe I can deal with some of that opposition through creative means that still get us what we want. I'm saying, right now, that's not how they're talking, but Tim,
Maybe we could partner with businesses and schools that teach wall climbing and identify the most dangerous walls and have them set up wall climbing partnerships there so they can monitor the wall.
isn't that gonna put more of them up the wall?
Not if you put guns on top.
You wanna partner with them on any other educational unit?
Sure, in the schools.
I mean, anything else besides climbing, you wanna do wall multiple issues with regard to wall structure and safety too? Okay, so I'll put plus, plus, plus. Okay, I need maybe 5 more minutes of alternatives, cause we gotta sort this out. We've got a staff meeting on, our unfunded pension liability in a couple of minutes. Patty?
Along the education lines, I think we need an aggressive outreach campaign along the lines of tough love. When we had 3 years ago egg DUIs on the spike, we did that campaign to show the devastating effects of driving while intoxicated, and it had a positive effect on reducing DUIs. I don't think the eggs in the community know or realize the deadly consequences to wall falling.
So we would put the city communications department with Dylan and her folks would put this together, or, and are there consequences, or what's the law?
Did Humpty Dumpty's friends see the result of his
You're not talking about criminalizing, you're not talking about the
No, I'm
police?
talking about outreach.
Okay, so your city would lead a hopefully voluntary campaign by the media to
I was
fight
actually
against.
bouncing off of what Tim said about the education in the schools,
Yeah, so
the safety along with what
Yeah,
happens.
So we do education in schools, and then we have a nice public service safety campaign on Channel 10, in between that crappy reality TV stuff. Okay, that's interesting. Cynthia?
What about, you were voicing some opposition from the apartment and private owners that we would have. What about tax incentives over a span of years to help defray the initial cost that they would spend? To
So
help
you-
minimize that.
So up here with the retrofitting, or injury reducing actions, you're going to give them some kind of tax relief. Obviously, we have to worry about foregoing revenue that we would use, that costs money too. The other issue is, do you have any worries about about fraud and how you verify and what to do about somebody that did it 2 years ago and thus is not eligible?
Yes, and that would go back to the safety codes or ordinances, as Justin named it, more properly, would be set, and then they would have to have inspections on a timeframe that would be determined by the committees.
One of the building officials told me that it might be a nightmare, but, or might not. So maybe you could, if they want the tax incentive, if they're getting the inspection, they gotta pay for the inspection. So that's how you get around that. You cover your costs, and that makes them serious. They only do serious things, otherwise they're not gonna pay for the inspection. I need 2 more ideas. Stay together, we gotta get this resolved in 23 minutes. Paul?
All right, if you're open to any kind of alternative, can I suggest 2 things? Either do nothing or completely get rid of all the walls.
I'm having a hard time with either of them. So in the first one, the do nothing, I just don't wanna go out to the news conference and say that I'm not gonna do anything. I'm a brave mayor, but I think the public concern about this is justified. I give you the fact that we got lots of problems. I'd sure like to fix this one. In terms of doing everything, I'd get impeached by the property owners of Pleasantville if I did everything and took all the walls down. Okay, just the 5 hands that we've got. So you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, last alternatives, Lori.
Well, I'm not sure, but if it's a monetary issue, we need to find more money for safety for the city. I know that 2/3 are private and 1/3 is public walls that were fixed or something like that.
But it sounds like you mentioned something about federal money coming in for bikes and bike safety. Is there any way to start a program where we could spend money and get more money, doing something with bike and use that money for public safety?
Well, one thing we could do, since we've got our own expenditures for bikes, if we were able to nail that federal grant, it's highly competitive, as you know, but the Bicycle Club would help us if we could get that federal grant. There is some of a supplanting product, so they want to be all new money, but there might be a way to program a little bit of existing bike money into wall falling, so we could absolutely work on that. Who else? Yes.
Well, just building off of Lori's suggestion there, I'd say that there's a short-term opportunity and a long-term opportunity, and the short-term opportunity involves education, and the long-term opportunity involves pursuing that federal funding environment. So I'd suggest that in that short term, we put together a partnership with the NGOs that are doing education outreach into the public schools and help inform their literature so that they are on our side in this discussion, and then form a partnership and alliance with private property owners and other public wall owners, and then the bike path partisans, and try and bring alignment around a federal funding proposal that is competitive.
That's all excellent. My worry, as you've probably seen all along, is I'm afraid that's not gonna give me the immediate results, or at least short-term results that I'd like to have. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, sir, I think some of the other alternatives you've been hearing recently are better because, as you're aware, just a general reminder, over half of the walls in the city were built by the Romans and the Normans, historically registered.
That's a historical.
Please don't get us sued with any retrofitting or demolition alternatives.
You know, as it happens, there was long that myth about our fair city, but as it happens, the first structure in Pleasantville was in 1909 by Hiram B. Johnson, so. There you have it. Arnold, yes.
You know, it seems to me like the bigger problem, or possible problem, is that these kids don't have activities. And so they're doing the walls right now, but then what happens when they hit middle school? They start picking up guns? So I'm thinking that.
We haven't had much of
So I'm thinking that if we put some effort into activities for these kids and.
Okay, stay with me, folks, we're almost
Do
done.
a media campaign where we let the citizens know that we're not just dealing with the wall problem, but we're dealing with problems down the road, we might garner more support. And I know when I was in Seattle, one of the middle schools had a high proportion of kids, low-income kids without activities, worked with the Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club supplied the after-school activities.